Permanent driver numbers have become an important part of Formula 1 in recent years. To use Formula 1's own words, permanent driver numbers help tie each driver's brand to their Formula 1 profile, enhancing marketing and recognition. The system was introduced in 2014, and it's fair to say that it has worked in its goal of tying a number to a driver's brand, to the point that there are some numbers that are inextricably linked with certain drivers, such as the number 44. You think of Lewis Hamilton. The number 5, you generally tend to think of Sebastian Vettel. The number 14 is Fernando Alonso, and so on and so forth. And there's even room for clever designs in a driver's logo, such as George Russell mixing his initials, GR, with his racing number 63. And then Lando Norris's logo is even more clever, I would say, as it uses negative space between his initials of L and N to create a 4 in the middle. A lot like the old F1 logo, actually. But before the system was introduced, Formula 1 used a different numbering system, based upon the constructors' standings of the previous season. The premise of this older system is rather simple. The champion and his teammate would always have the numbers 1 and 2. If the reigning champion moved teams from the reigning constructors' champion, then the reigning constructors' champion would have the numbers 3 and 4. This system was in use from 1996 until 2013, and replaced the older and much more confusing permanent number system. Now, of course, we have the permanent driver number system now, but what if that never happened? What if we were still using the old constructor numbering system? What would the driver numbers have looked like from 2014 until the current season of 2025? This is something I've actually explored a couple of times in the past few years, mainly on Reddit, but I stopped when I started getting downvoted for some reason. So here I am on YouTube instead, about 5 years later, to tell you exactly what the numbers would have been. So, to start with 2014, Sebastian Vettel would have retained the number 1 as he did in real life, whilst Ricciardo would have a slightly different number of 2. Mercedes finished the 2013 Constructors' Championship in 2nd place, so Hamilton and Rosberg would be 3 and 4. As Hamilton used the black T-bar, he would have been classed as the first driver, so he would have had the lower number of 3, and Rosberg would be number 4. 3rd place Ferrari would take the numbers 5 and 6, whilst 4th place Lotus would be 7 and 8, with Grosjean taking Raikkonen's old number of 7. McLaren, who finished 5th in 2013, would be the numbers 9 and 10, whilst Force India, who finished 6th, would be 11 and 12. Sauber finished 7th and would take the numbers 14 and 15, with the number 13 usually skipped due to superstitions. Toro Rosso finished 8th, and they would take numbers 16 and 17. Williams finished 9th, they would take 18 and 19. Marussia finished 10th, they would take numbers 20 and 21, and Caterham finished 2013 dead last in 11th, so they would take numbers 22 and 23. Yeah, the driver numbers looking very different compared to how they were in real life. Now we move on to 2015, which, as before, would use driver numbers attached to the team's finishing positions in the Constructors' Championship of the previous season, which in this case, of course, was 2014. Mercedes, who would retain the reigning champion Lewis Hamilton, would use the numbers 1 and 2 for the first time. Red Bull, who finished 2nd in the Constructors' Championship, would take the numbers 3 and 4, with Ricciardo actually managing to use his real-life permanent driver number. Williams finished 2014 in 3rd, so they would take the numbers 5 and 6. Ferrari would see Vettel taking his teammate's real-life permanent number 7, whilst Raikkonen would take number 8. McLaren, who once again finished 5th, would see Alonso take number 9 and Button number 10. Force India, once again finishing 6th, would have Hulkenberg and Perez, again 11 and 12. Toro Rosso would have Verstappen as number 14, and Sainz number 15. Lotus, who finished in a lowly 8th, would have Grosjean with the number 16, and Maldonado 17. Mana Marussia would have Will Stevens taking number 18, and Roberto Merri number 19. And Sauber, who finished 10th in 2014, would have Ericsson number 20, and his teammate Nasser would be 21. If Caterham had remained on the grid for 2015, they would have retained their previous numbers of 22 and 23. Then, for 2016, Mercedes would once again retain numbers 1 and 2 for Hamilton and Rosberg. Ferrari, who finished P2 in the championship, would have Vettel number 3 and Raikkonen number 4. Williams would again be Massa 5, Bottas 6. Red Bull, who slumped to 4th, would have Ricciardo 7, Verstappen 8. Force India, who finished 5th, would have Hulkenberg 9 and Perez 10. Renault would inherit Lotus's entry and take their numbers, with Magnussen number 11 and Palmer number 12. Toro Rosso would finish 7th yet again, so Kvyat would be number 14 and Sainz number 15. Sauber were 8th, Ericsson 16, Nasser 17. McLaren finished 9th, Alonso 18, Button 19. Manor finished 10th and last in 2015, so Wehrlein would be 20 and Rio Haryanto / Esteban Ocon would be number 21. Haas, who did not compete in the previous year, would take Caterham's old numbers of 22 and 23. Things get a little bit more interesting for 2017, and here's why. Nico Rosberg retired almost immediately after the 2016 season ended. The last time that this happened was 2 years in a row in 1992 and 1993, where 2 Williams champions, Nigel Mansell and Alain Prost, retired from the sport or otherwise left it for a while and did not defend their titles in the succeeding year. This left Formula 1 in a position where it could not give any driver on the grid the number 1. So instead, it gave the reigning Constructors champions, Williams, the number 0 instead, which they used for both succeeding years, 1993 and 1994. When Alain Prost was given the option to use either number, he chose the number 2 as his number for 1993, and so the number 2 became the de facto first driver number in the case that the reigning champion was not on the grid. So here's how the numbers would have looked for the 2017 season. Mercedes would be the first team since Williams to use the numbers 2 and 0, with Hamilton being number 2 and Bottas the number 0. Ricciardo would once again take back his permanent driver number 3, and Verstappen would be number 4. Sebastian Vettel would take on his real-life permanent driver number 5 for the first time, whilst Raikkonen would be number 6. Force India, who finished 4th in 2016, would have Perez number 7 and Ocon number 8. Williams, who slumped to 5th, would have Massa number 9 and Lance Stroll number 10. McLaren, who shot back up to 6th, would have Alonso number 11 and Van Dorn number 12. Toro Rosso remained 7th again, so Kvyat number 14 and Sainz number 15. Haas, who finished 8th, would have Grosjean number 16 and Magnussen number 17. Renault finished 9th, so Hulkenberg will be number 18 and Julian Palmer 19. Sauber narrowly finished 10th in 2016, so Marcus Ericsson would be number 20 and Pascal Wehrlein number 21. Meanwhile, Manor MRT collapsed before the beginning of the 2017 season, but if they had been able to participate, they would have taken on Caterham's old numbers of 22 and 23. And now we move to 2018. The number 1 would return to the sport, once again going back to Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton, with Bottas inheriting the number 2. Ferrari would have the numbers 3 and 4 for Vettel and Raikkonen. Red Bull would have the numbers 5 and 6 for Ricciardo and Verstappen. Force India would retain the numbers 7 and 8 for Perez and Ocon, whilst Williams would retain the numbers 9 and 10, this time for Lance Stroll as the first driver and Sergei Sirotkin as the second driver. Renault finished 6th in 2017, so they would take the numbers 11 and 12 for Hülkenberg and Sainz. Toro Rosso, yet again, finished 7th, and they would have the numbers 14 and 15 for Brendan Hartley and Pierre Gasly respectively. Haas would retain the numbers 16 and 17 for Grosjean and Magnussen. McLaren would return to having the numbers 18 and 19 for Fernando Alonso and Stoffel van Dorn respectively, and Sauber, who finished 10th again, would retain the numbers 20 and 21 for Ericsson and Charles Leclerc respectively. It's worth noting that Force India became Racing Point Force India at the Belgian Grand Prix, and may have been relegated to using the numbers 22 and 23, leaving the numbers 7 and 8 vacant. Now on to 2019. Mercedes yet again retained numbers 1 and 2 for Hamilton and Bottas. Ferrari would be Vettel 3 and Leclerc 4. Red Bull would again be numbers 5 and 6, this time with Verstappen number 5 and Gasly and later Albon being number 6. For Renault it would be Ricciardo 7, Hülkenberg 8. Haas would be Grosjean 9 and Magnussen 10. McLaren would be Carlos Sainz 11 and Lando Norris 12. Racing Point would be Sergio Perez 14 and Lance Stroll 15. Sauber would be Kimi Raikkonen 16 and Antonio Giovinazzi number 17. Toro Rosso finished 9th in 2018, bringing an end to their streak of 7th places, so Kvyat would be number 18 and Albon, later Gasly, would be 19, and Williams would be George Russell 20 and Robert Kubica 21. And Williams would not relinquish these numbers for several more years. 2020 now, and the top 3 teams retain the same numbers as before. Hamilton 1, Bottas 2, Vettel 3, Leclerc 4, Verstappen 5, Albon 6. McLaren retake the numbers 7 and 8 that they last used in 1993, I think, whilst Renault now have the numbers 9 and 10. Toro Rosso finished 2019 in 6th, so their successor identity AlphaTauri would have the numbers 11 and 12 for Daniel Kvyat and Pierre Gasly. Racing Point would remain as numbers 14 and 15 for Perez and Stroll. Alfa Romeo would remain as numbers 16 and 17 for Raikkonen and Giovinazzi. Haas, who finished 9th, would have Grosjean 18 and Magnussen 19, and Williams once again Russell 20 and Nicholas Latifi number 21. As 2020 saw the first major shake-up of the team orders in quite a number of years, the car numbers for 2021 are a little bit different. Mercedes once again retain the numbers 1 and 2 for Hamilton and Bottas, whilst Red Bull will go back to having the numbers 3 and 4 for Verstappen and Perez, the first time they've had these numbers since 2017. McLaren, who finished 3rd in 2020, would have Ricciardo number 5 and Norris number 6. Aston Martin would have Stroll number 7, as since he uses the black T-bar, means he's technically the first driver. So Sebastian Vettel would be number 8. Alpine would be Alonso 9 and Ocon 10. Ferrari, who finished 6th in 2020, would be Charles Leclerc 11 and Carlos Sainz 12. AlphaTauri, who once again finished 7th, would be Gasly 14 and Tsunoda 15. Alfa Romeo would have Raikkonen 16 and Giovinazzi 17. Haas would be Mazepin 18 and Mick Schumacher 19. And Williams again would be George Russell 20 and Nicholas Latifi 21. 2022 now, and the numbers 1 and 2 would go back to Red Bull for the first time since 2014, with Verstappen as the reigning champion being number 1 and teammate Perez number 2. Mercedes would retake the numbers 3 and 4 that they too last had in 2014, with Hamilton 3 and Russell 4. Ferrari again has the numbers 5 and 6 that they similarly had in 2014, though they've run it a couple of times since then, with Leclerc 5 and Sainz 6. McLaren would return to the numbers 7 and 8 for Ricciardo and Norris, whilst Alpine would retain the numbers 9 and 10. AlphaTauri would again have the numbers 11 and 12 for Gasly and Tsunoda, whilst Aston Martin, who slumped to 7th, would have Stroll 14 and Vettel 15. Williams would finally take themselves off the bottom of the grid and finish 8th in 2021, so Alexander Albon would be 16 and Latifi 17. Alfa Romeo fell to 9th in 2021, so Valtteri Bottas would be number 18 and Guan Yu Zhou number 19. And as Haas had finished 10th in 2021, Magnussen would be number 20 and Schumacher 21. 2023 would once again have Red Bull retaining the numbers 1 and 2 for Verstappen and Perez. Ferrari would retake numbers 3 and 4 from Mercedes, and Mercedes would sink to 5 and 6. Alpine would retake numbers 7 and 8 for Ocon and Gasly, whilst McLaren would slump back to numbers 9 and 10 for Norris and Piastri. Now it's worth noting that Norris in real life uses the yellow T-cam, which would technically make him the second driver. However, he has the seniority in the team, which technically speaking means he is the first driver. So I have given him the number 9 here, even though he may potentially have used the number 10 if this were a real life scenario. The same applies to Mercedes, as Hamilton has been using the yellow T-cam since 2022, and Russell has been using the black T-cam, which, if this were real life first driver, second driver stuff, Russell would have the lower number and Hamilton the higher one. Alfa Romeo take their highest finish to date and have the numbers 11 and 12 for Bottas and Zhou, whilst Aston Martin have retaken numbers 14 and 15 for Stroll and Alonso, having last had those numbers in 2020. Haas retake the numbers 16 and 17 that they last had in 2018, whilst AlphaTauri once again are 18 and 19, having last had those numbers in 2019. And Williams finished 10th and last again after 1 year away from the bottom rung of the standings, so they are again numbers 20 and 21. So now we're on to 2024, the most recent season to have taken place. Red Bull still have the numbers 1 and 2 for Verstappen and Perez. Mercedes return to the numbers 3 and 4 for Hamilton and Russell, whilst Ferrari again return to the numbers 5 and 6 for Leclerc and Sainz. McLaren again return to the numbers 7 and 8 for Norris and Piastri, whilst Aston Martin have the highest numbers they've had since 2021 with Stroll 9 and Alonso 10. Alpine slump to 6th with Ocon 11 and Gasly 12. Williams have the highest numbers they've had since 2018 with Albon 14 and Sargent and later Colapinto 15. AlphaTauri have Tsunoda 16 and Ricciardo, later Lawson 17. Alfa Romeo have Bottas 18 and Zhou 19, and Haas, who finished 10th again, have Magnussen 20 and Hülkenberg 21. And now for 2025, more than 10 years since the permanent driver number system was introduced and the old constructor number system was retired. But we're still doing it because it's fun, for me at least. For only the second time in this scenario, the reigning champion is not from the team that won the Constructors' Championship. So Red Bull retains the numbers 1 and 2 for Verstappen and Lawson, whilst reigning Constructors' Champions McLaren have Norris 3 and Piastri 4. Though you could argue that Norris might end up having his real-life permanent driver number 4 for the first time in this scenario. Ferrari retain the numbers 5 and 6 for Leclerc and Hamilton, despite finishing second in the Constructors' Championship. And it's debatable who would have the number 5, as whilst Leclerc has been first driver at the team since 2021, one might also argue that Hamilton could be put in that position. Mercedes have their lowest numbers since this scenario began, with Russell 7 and Antonelli 8. Aston Martin retained the numbers 9 and 10 for Stroll and Alonso, and Alpine retained the numbers 11 and 12 for Gasly and Doohan, even though they shouldn't have those numbers in my opinion. Haas have their highest numbers since in a few years, with Ocon 14 and Behrman 15. AlphaTauri retain their numbers of 16 and 17 from at least a year or two ago for Tsunoda and Hadjar. Williams have the numbers 18 and 19 for the first time since 2014, I believe, for Albon and Sainz. Once again, it's debatable which driver would have had the number 18. And for Sauber, Hülkenberg would be number 20 and Bortoletto 21. One wonders how the numbers might appear for 2026, but of course that's the future. One thing we can be sure of for 2026, however, is that the numbers 22 and 23 would have been making their reappearance with the addition of Cadillac to the grid, making their first appearance since 2016. And that's the end of that. I don't really have anything else to say. It's just a neat little thought experiment, really. Makes you wonder how things might have ended up had things gone differently. Well, we don't have to wonder because I've done it for you. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. And I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you very much. Good night.